The three relationships that quietly shape our lives, written and narrated by Peter J. Merrick, A.K.A. just an old fart trying to make sense of this beautiful and mysterious thing we call life, one lesson at a time. Apparently, this old fart thought he understood relationships. The older I get, the more I realize I understood activity far better than I understood people. For more than 3 decades, I built businesses, advised families, spoke at conferences, taught, wrote books and articles, and spent more time in airports and boardrooms than I ever imagined I would. By almost every measure society uses, I was successful. Then, in 2019, life quietly interrupted me. I experienced a significant health scare. For the first time in my life, tomorrow no longer felt guaranteed. Soon afterward, I made what was only supposed to be a temporary move from Toronto to San Diego. Then COVID happened, almost overnight. The life I had spent decades building stopped. The meetings stopped. The conferences stopped. The travel stopped. The music stopped. The noise stopped. For the first time in my adult life, there was nowhere left to run. There was only silence, and in that silence, there was only me. Life had quietly removed almost every distraction that had once allowed me to avoid myself. I could continue living unconsciously, or I could begin the lifelong process of becoming more conscious, asking better questions, telling myself the truth, then becoming a little more human each day. Looking back, I no longer see that season as one of the worst periods of my life. I see it as one of the greatest gifts I have ever been given. Success had introduced me to tens of thousands of people across this big, beautiful, mysterious, and wonderful world. Solitude introduced me to myself during long walks along San Diego Harbor. And countless mornings swimming 1 metric mile, I slowly began asking questions I had unconsciously avoided for most of my life. Not what I believed, why I believed it, not what I had accomplished, who I was becoming, not how I had built a successful career, how I had built my relationships. The more honest I became with myself, the more I realized something very uncomfortable. I had spent decades looking the part of becoming successful. I had spent far less time becoming conscious. Before I go any further, I need to confess something, a painful truth about myself. For much of my life, I was surrounded by the very relationships I'm about to describe. Even harder to admit, I unconsciously helped create them. Looking back, I had what many people would have called a rich life. My Rolex was full of contacts. My calendar was full of meetings. My phone rarely stopped ringing. At the time, I thought that meant I had built a meaningful life. Today, I realize many of those relationships were rich in activity, but poor in depth and timeless meaning. I confuse being well connected with being deeply, meaningfully, and timelessly connected. Perhaps that is why I write and share this with you today, not to tell you how to live, but to honestly share what I continue to discover about myself, in the hope that it might encourage you to discover something about yourself. Writing has become my way of taking stock, not of everyone else's life, of my own. As I have grown older, I have come to believe there are 3 relationships that quietly shape our lives. The first is what I call a utility relationship. These relationships are built upon exchange. Each person brings something the other person finds valuable: business, introductions, opportunity, influence, knowledge, money, or access. There is nothing wrong with utility relationships and real connections. Business could not exist without them. The mistake is believing they are friendships. A few years after moving to San Diego, life gave me a lesson I have never forgotten. Before leaving Canada, I had moved approximately 70% of my client's business through one wholesaler. For years, we worked exceptionally well together. I respected him. I believed we had built a genuine relationship. While I was away, He had been promoted to senior vice president at one of the world's largest financial institutions, a multinational firm managing more than $1 trillion in assets. When I found myself working on a significant opportunity back in Toronto, I naturally reached out to him. I sent him a simple email asking if we could spend a few minutes discussing the case. His reply surprised me. Instead of calling, he politely referred me to someone else. For a few moments, I felt disappointed. Then something quietly changed within me. He had not stopped respecting me because I had changed. He had simply stopped seeing me as useful. Once I was no longer producing business, my utility had ended. That is the nature of a utility relationship. When the utility ends, the relationship often ends with it. Oddly enough, I cannot even blame him. Looking back, I had misunderstood the relationship. Then came the realization that humbled me even more. There were seasons of my own life when I had unconsciously viewed people through exactly the same lens. Not because I intended to use them, but because I had spent so many years living inside transactional environments that I had stopped noticing how transactional I had become. That realization did not make me cynical. It made me curious. What other beliefs had I accepted without ever questioning them? One of my favorite examples comes from the 1996 film Jerry Maguire, starring Tom Cruise. When Jerry loses everything, almost everyone leaves. The clients disappear. The colleagues disappear. Even his fiancée, Avery Bishop, played by Kelly Preston, walks away. But Rod Tidwell, played brilliantly by Cuba Gooding Jr., stays. Not because Jerry is successful, not because Jerry is useful, because somewhere along the journey, the relationship stopped being transactional. It became human. That old movie asks a timeless question. If there is nothing left to gain, what remains? Apparently, that question became the beginning of a very different life for this old fart. That question stayed with me, not for a day, not for a month, for years. To this very moment, as I write these words, the more I reflected, the more I realized there was a second kind of relationship that had quietly shaped much of my life. I call them good time relationships. These are the people who naturally gather when life is going well. They celebrate your victories. They laugh with you. They share dinners, vacations, birthdays, and wonderful memories. There is absolutely nothing wrong with these relationships. In many ways, they make life enjoyable. The mistake is expecting them to carry you when life becomes heavy. Storms reveal foundations, not intentions. When someone you love dies, when your marriage ends, when your health changes, when business slows down, when life no longer looks impressive from the outside, that is when you discover the difference between the people who came to enjoy your life and the people who came to share it. My father understood this long before I did. He once said to me, "Peter, nobody remembers who came to the wedding. It is easy to show up when everyone is celebrating, but they never forget who stood beside them at the funeral." Looking back, he was never talking about weddings or funerals. He was talking about loyalty. If I am completely honest, for much of my life, I accepted both utility relationships and good time relationships without ever questioning them. Even harder to admit, I unconsciously became that man. I was building a career, building businesses, writing, speaking, traveling, and producing, closing the mega deals, always moving toward the next achievement. I genuinely believed I was building a meaningful life. Looking back, I had a Rolex full of contacts. I had calendars filled months in advance. I had hundreds of thousands of people who knew my name. Yet I had spent very little time asking myself a question that now seems so obvious to me. Who had I become? Superficial success had become a wonderful distraction. It rewarded me professionally and financially. It also prevented me from asking deeper questions personally. The silence that followed my move to San Diego and the years that followed COVID quietly removed those distractions. for the first time in my life, I could no longer hide behind accomplishments. I was left with only my thoughts. Looking back, I am profoundly grateful because that silence taught me something success never could. Success introduced me to so-called tens of thousands of people. Solitude introduced me to myself. Somewhere during those years, another question quietly emerged. Not who has my back, but whose back have I had? That simple yet profound question changed everything within me because it stopped me from evaluating everyone else and forced me to evaluate myself. Had I only called certain people when I needed something? Had I confused networking with friendship? Had I unconsciously valued people for what they could do, instead of simply valuing them because they were fellow human beings? Those questions deeply humbled me. They also made me freer and fuller as a human being because I finally understood something I had missed for decades. We do not merely choose relationships. Over time, our relationships quietly shape the people we become. That realization eventually led me to the third relationship, the only one I consciously seek today. I no longer call it a soul connection. I simply call it a real relationship. It is where I have your back and you have mine. Not because there is something to gain, not because life is easy, not because circumstances are convenient, but because we have quietly chosen one another. These relationships are extraordinarily rare. Perhaps they have always been. Maybe that is why they feel so precious when we find them. I no longer measure the richness of my life by how many people know my name. I measure it by the very small number of people I know would answer the phone at 2 o'clock in the morning, and the equally small number of people for whom I would gladly answer mine. Perhaps that is why loneliness has quietly become one of the great epidemics of our time. Not because we lack relationships, but because many of us have mistaken activity for intimacy, usefulness for friendship, and attention for love. Oscar Wilde once wrote, "A cynic is a man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing." Sometimes I wonder if our greatest poverty is not financial at all. Perhaps it is forgetting the immeasurable, intrinsic, and innate value of another human being. The beautiful part is this: we are not condemned to the relationships we inherited, nor are we trapped by the unconscious patterns we lived for years. Every day gives us another opportunity to be fully human, another conversation, another act of loyalty, understanding, kindness, a mutual love, that of having a real human connection, another chance to become the kind of person we have spent a lifetime searching for. Becoming conscious is not a destination, it is a process. At this stage of my life, I simply want to become a little more honest than I was yesterday, a little more appreciative, a little more grateful, a little more loyal, a little more understanding, a little more kind, a little more loving, a little more alive, and if I'm fortunate, have a little more humility on my way to becoming a little more human. Today, I find myself thanking the people who quietly stood beside me when there was nothing to gain, the ones who stayed when life became inconvenient, the ones who had my back simply because they cared, whether they realize it or not. They helped make me more human. The people who changed my life were rarely the people who impressed me. They were the people who stayed, the ones who would have taken a bullet for me, not because they had to, but because they loved me. And they knew, without a single word ever needing to be spoken, that I would have done the same for them. I remember them. I honor them. And whether they realize it or not, they help make this old fart a little more human. If these reflections cause you to pause, to take stock of your own life, and to ask not only what kinds of relationships you have, but what kind of relationship you have become, then perhaps this old fart and his keyboard accomplished something worthwhile today. Peter J. Merrick, A.K.A. Old Fart. In the end, life is not measured by the number of hands we shook, but by the few hands that never let go.